everybody. Welcome to the world of cheese in an hour. My name is Liz Thorpe, and I am going to be giving you the basic foundation to make you more proficient in the world of cheese. So before I give you a little bit about my background, I want to tell you what we're going to talk about today. I'll introduce myself, but then I want to give you a basic definition of what cheese is, followed by a brief history of cheese and when humans started making it. Hint, it was basically at the very beginning of when we started forming sort of domesticated communities. Then, although I'm not a cheesemaker, we're going to go through a very basic summary of the cheese-making process, followed by a bit more about cheese by type. And then my favorite part of these is to get to the Q&A so I can answer any of the questions that you have about cheese. So settle in. As I said, my name is Liz Thorpe. I'm one of the country's leading experts on cheese, and I've been working in the specialty cheese industry for 18 years. For those of you who are from the New York area, you may know Murray's Cheese, which is one of the most famous cheese shops in the country. I actually ran that company from 2002 to 2012 as its first vice president, and have authored 2 books about cheese. One is called The Cheese Chronicles. It's all about cheese in America. And then my most recent book, The Book of Cheese, which is meant to be like the ultimate reference book for anybody interested in cheese. I do a lot of writing and speaking for media outlets, food publications. I've been a judge on Chopped. So my day job is that I'm a consultant and I do lots of spreadsheets working with big retailers and cheesemakers. But talking to real people who are interested in cheese and want to know more so they can buy more and eat more is basically my favorite thing to do. So one of the questions I get more than anything is how in the world I got a career in cheese. There is no sort of like prescribed path to becoming a cheese expert. It's not like being a sommelier where you can get a master sommelier degree or a master of wine degree. A lot of the cheese industry is kind of learn it as you go, shall we say. And for me, that learning started in a small shop in Brooklyn. I graduated from Yale in the year 2000 with 2 degrees, neither of which had anything to do with food or cheese. And I lived in Brooklyn and I had a desk job and was generally miserable. And I walked into this little shop one day and they had a case and it had maybe 25 or 30 cheeses in it. And I had never seen that before. I mean, I'd seen like the supermarket with lots of different kinds of cheddar and shredded cheese, but I had never seen sort of crumbly, creamy cheeses and orange cheeses and gray cheeses and these big, huge, like hulking pieces of cheese. And I thought, like, how do you get all these different things, but they're all just cheese? You know, what makes them turn out so differently? And that was kind of the beginning for me. I bought a book, I got really into it, and I decided to quit my job and go work at a cheese shop and see if I could make a career out of cheese. And here I am, 20 years later. So I think about my own journey learning about cheese, and one of the things that I've really learned is that having a kind of basic understanding of how cheese is made will give you a basic understanding of what your cheese might look like, taste like, smell like, what it's good for. And so that's where I want to start today. I want to give you that sort of foundation, and hopefully at some point we could do classes where we actually taste cheese together, which to me is the best way to do it. But this will give you like the foundation you need. So when you walk into the grocery store and you're confronted with 300 cheeses, you can start to make some educated guesses about what you're going to be buying. So let's get into it. What is cheese anyway? I was doing an event a few weeks ago virtually, and somebody walked up to me and said, I'm really embarrassed. I don't really know what cheese is. Like, how do you make a piece of cheese? So for everyone who's wondering, what is cheese anyway? Cheese is a fermented dairy product. It's made from the milk of a ruminant animal. And usually that means a cow, a goat, or a sheep. But there are water buffalo cheeses, there are cheeses made of camel's milk, and there are even knack cheeses, which is the female yak. I ate a lot of that when I was in Nepal. Don't really recommend it, but it's there. Cheese can be made anywhere in the world. Certainly there are areas where cheese historically sort of evolved and where key recipes were invented. But cheese can be made anywhere, and today it really is made everywhere. I guess maybe not Antarctica, but it's a universal food across the globe. All cheese is made from 3 ingredients. It's made from milk, it's made from bacteria, often called cultures on the label of a cheese, and it's made from salt. You can't have cheese without those 3 ingredients. And the vast majority of cheeses, like 99.9% of cheeses, also include a 4th ingredient, which is enzymes. And I'll explain what those are and what they do. But those 4 variables can be manipulated in thousands of different ways, and you can produce thousands and even millions of different cheeses just working with those 4 inputs. So I like context. I was an American Studies major in college, and so I like to kind of have some understanding of what's going on in a certain place in time that might have led to inventions and creations and patterns of human behavior. So in the case of cheese, we're going to go all the way back to the Neolithic Revolution, which happened here in the Fertile Crescent in what is modern day Iran, Iraq, Syria. And this is where humans sort of first really made the transition from being hunter-gatherers to having domesticated communities where they were raising crops. And the advent of dairying and of animal domestication followed very quickly after that. So the domestication of animals began in this area of the world in the Fertile Crescent in around 7500 BC. And animals were first, goat and sheep were domesticated, and cows followed about 700 years later. But goats and sheep were particularly used to being in small confined areas like caves, and they were more easily domesticated and more easily accessible. So animals were first domesticated, but they weren't domesticated for milking or for cheese making. They were domesticated for meat. And of course, when an animal has a baby animal, it makes milk to feed that animal. And it's likely that these first domesticated animals were milked, and that their milk might have been given to babies or to children. But people didn't drink milk the way we drink milk today. And in fact, adults lacked the necessary enzyme in their body to digest lactose, which is the sugar in milk. Babies and small children still had that enzyme in their stomachs because they were drinking their mother's milk. But as they grew up, that enzyme stopped being produced, and so adults couldn't consume fluid milk. Now, in the warm climate of the Fertile Crescent, something happened when these animals were milked here and there, as needed. And that was a spontaneous fermentation. Warm air, warm temperatures is a perfect climate for bacteria to get busy and replicate. And as they replicate, they consume the lactose in milk and they turn it into lactic acid. So if you've ever left a carton of milk in your fridge for too long and you might have wound up with chunky milk, you have spontaneously fermented in your fridge. Your milk has gone sour. So this fermentation process happens naturally under the right conditions, and it did happen in the Fertile Crescent. And it was sort of discovered that when the milk curdled, it could be eaten by everybody. But when it was fluid milk, it could not be digested. So there became, around the year 7000 BC, this impetus to try to make milk ferment. And 2 other things were going on around this same time, which were really critical to the leap into cheese making. The first is that animal domestication got fully into swing, and there were many animals and thus a lot of excess milk, not one goat here or there, but dozens and hundreds of goats in one contained area. And then also pyrotechnology, our ability to use fire to create pottery and ceramics, happened around 7000. So suddenly there was this kind of perfect storm of cultural conditions and geographic conditions to help human beings transform milk. There was a lot of milk. We had figured out that we could curdle it, and that would make it edible for everybody. and we created the pots and jars that could be used as vessels for storing milk. And so those conditions all combined, and of course, maybe it doesn't go without saying, but milk was an extremely valuable and extremely perishable nutrition source, very high in fat, very high in protein. And this fermentation was the key to making that nutrition accessible and also potentially preservable. And so we started making cheese. We started curdling milk and storing it in pottery jars. And this isn't just a theory, by the way. There's actually a fair amount of archaeological evidence with pottery shards from this area and from this time period where the pottery has trace amounts of lipids in it. So they can actually test the pottery shards and see that they were storing not milk, but fermented dairy. So point being, cheese has been with us from the beginning. And it's a very ancient food. And frankly, the way that it's made, yeah, it's modernized, but the basic steps and the basic outputs are still the same. So that leads me to cheese making.